It's been a while, hasn't it? And it looks like the battle has started. The new generation is here. At least I think it is. It doesn't actually feel the same way the other generations did. I mean, on YouTube, yeah. But on the outside, it feels as if something was missing. Which makes this gen not feel so much like 8, but more like 7.4. Giving it just enough of a feeling to be called better, but not enough to be called 8. At least, not yet. It's still extremely early in this gen, so we're still in the anything can happen stage. But do you all feel like you're in a new generation? Or do you feel like you're still in Gen 7, but it's just been stretched out a bit? What does one normally think of when we think of a new generation? This probably depends on when you actually started gaming. As we can see, a lot of us have different definitions of what a new gen is, and those definitions are starting to conflict with each other. Case in point, the Wii U. I noticed that some people really don't like the Wii U being compared to the PS3 or Xbox 360. They don't like the idea of an 8th generation console being compared to or even used to fight with against a 7th generation console. To which the question that comes to mind is, when exactly did the rules change? When talking about console wars, we have to remember that there's always two different phases of the war. Phase 1 being last versus new, and Phase 2 being new versus new. Some people make the mistake of thinking that this phase doesn't even exist, that once a new console's made, it's not made to compete with consoles of the last generation. But that isn't actually true. If it was, then Sega would have never told us that their console was better than the NES. Instead, they would have simply waited until Nintendo made the SNES to make that statement. So what they did was simply create two different arguments. Phase 1 argument, Sega Genesis is 16-bit and NES is only 8. Phase 2 argument, Sega Genesis has blast processing. We all remember that, don't we? And if Nintendo made this console to bring in the hardcore fan base, which consoles do you think those fans come from? Consoles of last gen. So the Wii U was in fact made to compete with the PS3 and Xbox 360. It's made to take the fan base from the consoles that are already out, not the ones that are currently being worked on. Now obviously, Phase 2 hasn't started yet, but when it does, Nintendo could be in a lot of trouble. The problem right now is that Nintendo's Phase 1 was split into two different things. Phase 1A, console is made for the hardcore, and as we all know, certain things are normally expected from the hardcore gamer of today, one of those things being graphics. Phase 1B, new unique controller. Clearly, Phase 1B was made more for Nintendo's last-gen casual gamers, which clearly explains the commercials they've been making. But what if Sony and Microsoft release a console next year? What would be Nintendo's Phase 2? We know it won't be graphics because I feel safe enough now to make the statement that both Sony and Microsoft's next-gen consoles will either match Nintendo's or surpass it. And what about Generation 8 Phases 1A and B? Sony already has it on lock, and Microsoft is working on it. A new console with the phase made for the hardcore gamer versus consoles that started off made for the hardcore gamer actually forces people to use the hardware/graphics argument. I mean, after all, if you're gonna argue over two consoles that do the same thing, then the first argument becomes which one can do it better. Nintendo has finally re-entered the graphics war. It's just not turning out the way a lot of us expected it to. I'm pretty sure that Sony and Microsoft won't wait this time to mimic what Nintendo's doing, especially if it turns out to be successful. Sadly, as of right now, Nintendo can't change Phase 1 to play the "we have better graphics than our competition" card, as that's not really in their favor at the moment. If anything, graphics is something you want to stay away from until developers start to truly understand how the hardware works, like Sony and the cell processor. Except for one thing. The problem here is that by the time the developers figure out how to truly use the Wii U, there's a chance that a console that's much easier to develop for, and more powerful than the Wii U, will have already been released. As some of you know, developers are already making negative statements about the Wii U. And these statements could end up not only making it difficult for Nintendo to compete with Sony and Microsoft's 7th generation consoles, but make it almost damn near impossible to even have a chance against their 8th generation consoles if things work out well for them. What really helped the Wii was the fact that it was different, but the Wii U isn't as different as the last generation competition, which in this case, they had to do to even stand a chance in getting Sony and Microsoft's hardcore fanbase. We now have a new console, competing with older consoles using games that the older consoles already have, but in some cases not working as well for it. Now, this could easily change later, but it's definitely not how you want to start. Sony had a similar problem, but it started that problem out in the beginning, when all 3 Generation 7 consoles were out. Nintendo is starting out with the problem while trying to get a head start. It's looking as though Nintendo's going to do the same thing with the Wii U that they did with the Wii. They made the console perfect, but only for what they themselves plan on doing with it, while at the same time telling the hardcore gamers that it's also good for them. Then they assumed that the developers would react to it the same way they did to the Xbox 360 and later after they got more used to it, the PS3. This worked out well in some cases. Black Ops 2 for instance. But instead, it seems like it's starting out with the same problem that the PS3 had for multiplats. And as much as some may or may not like multiplats, they're gonna play a huge role in the success of a console when making it for the new generation hardcore gamer. Nintendo's exclusives are good, but sadly, they're only good for those of us who like what they make, which now means Nintendo has to rely on companies that are currently saying negative things about their console in order to bring in the fan base of the consoles they're currently competing with in the first place. Not a good start. Right now there's blame being thrown around all over the place. It's Nintendo's fault for using the hardware they did, it's the developers' fault because they're being too lazy. And with that, our new YouTube console war begins, which is really just the same battle as last time, with the complaining roles reversed. In the end, guys, what's really going to help Nintendo isn't what we think about the hardware, but what the developers think. As I've stated before, Nintendo knows exactly what they plan on doing with this console, so the hardware they put into it is perfect for them. The new generation Zelda and Mario's, not that one, the real new generation Mario, will look amazing, and the controller will enhance the gameplay for him. It was wise of Nintendo to throw the first punch this gen, but without the help of the other developers, that hit will barely tickle their competition when trying to pull in the hardcore fanbase. Their commercials were obviously them trying to bring in the casual fanbase once again. So it does look like they're still relying on the casual fanbase while hoping the other developers take care of the rest. As some of us are noticing, Nintendo isn't actually getting the start a lot of us expected it to. But like I said, it's still a little too early to say how this whole thing's gonna play itself out. As some of you know, a little bit of information about the next-gen Xbox and PS4, Orbis, was released. Will they be leaps and bounds over their predecessors? Or will they simply be a small leap and base their new generation on a specific feature exclusive to the console itself? Now, I'd rather not get into this whole slow RAM and GPU crap, as it's a pointless argument that no one here can win because no one in our community develops games for the Wii U. We as the gamers can either like it or hate it. But it doesn't mean anything if we like the hardware or not. It's up to the developers. And if the developers have a problem with it, then Nintendo's plan with the PS3 and 360 hardcore fan base will have a problem as well. I guess at this point, it's a waiting game. Will Nintendo be able to win Phase 1 before Phase 2 starts? Or will the PS3 and 360 win Phase 1, making Phase 2 an easy victory? Then again, what is Nintendo's Phase 2? The new console war has begun. Or I guess we could all just shut the hell up, play our video games, and be happy. Whichever works.